guys, in this video I'm going to talk to you about the minimum hardware requirements for you to have a good online piano lesson experience from the perspective of the student. So these are my opinions. This is based off my experience. However, I have been teaching online for several years now. I've taught many thousands of online piano lessons. And so hopefully my experience carries some weight. And the first thing I'd like to say and draw upon is the idea that you just really don't need very much in order to get started. In fact, that's all you need. This is my laptop and a laptop stand. And the laptop is modern enough, as in like past couple of years, that's a 2019 model. It's modern enough to have a relatively decent camera and relatively decent microphones. And the laptop stand is actually really important because it positions the laptop high enough where I can see like most of the full range of the keyboard, and I can also see the student's face at the same time. And so that is positioned in such a way as to make that possible. And in just a little bit, I'll share some footage from that laptop in exactly that position and let you know what it looks like, and then assure you that that's all I really need from a student, okay? So the other main thing that you need is a good internet connection, and that's probably the place to start. So the biggest issue that I have with folks in their internet connections is that their upload speed often is not high enough. Now I use Zoom, and Zoom is not particularly forgiving on the internet side of things. It's got awesome audio features, but it's not forgiving on the internet side of things. And so I've had to switch to some other clients before and I've gotten better performance. So that's just something to keep in mind. But for the most part, I feel like you're going to have the best experience if your upload speed is at least 5 megabits a second. And of course, your download would need to be that high as well. And that will give you a little bit of wiggle room to deal with the other internet traffic that you're dealing with during a lesson. I would also prefer that the student be as close to their router as possible. And many of my students use a really, really long Ethernet cable to drag it across their house and connect into their modem or connect into their router like directly and put that directly into their device so that they don't have to worry about Wi-Fi interference. And that makes a really big difference. I know that sounds like a chore, but really it only takes a few minutes. And you'll just get so much more out of your piano lessons if you're willing to connect directly or if you're willing to move your stuff to be in the same room as your router. Okay, so that's probably the biggest factor. And then hardware comes second. So if you have a device that's too old, you'll probably need to get a microphone. But if it's recent at all, it'll probably have a good enough mic and a good enough camera to get started. I really don't need to see very much. I do need to hear pretty well. But for the most part, most modern laptop mics are fine for that, up until the point where the student starts to reach that late intermediate to advanced level. That's where I'd like to hear a little bit more, and that's when I recommend getting a better mic. I almost never recommend better cameras because I just don't need to see very much. I could probably give a good lesson over the phone. So I'm just not concerned with what the visual looks like. I just need to make sure that the technique is there. I need to see it from the side and make sure that what the student's playing matches what it sounds like. And I'm really focused on the sound. I'm usually looking at music anyway, unless I'm examining a particular technical issue. Now, from the teaching side of things, it's really important that the teacher knows their repertoire. So in my case, I'm teaching things that I am very familiar with, and that's what lets me get away with not having to have great cameras. And on the flip side, I have spent a lot of money on my setup, and I have all of these fancy cameras and camera views, and I have a really good mic setup, and I'm broadcasting in stereo. And this is because I feel like the student needs all of the help that they can get. They need the clearest video, they need the clearest sound that they can get because they are not drawing upon a bunch of experience and they don't know all of the repertoire, which means all of the information that they're getting visually and what they hear, that's all they're getting. So it's really important from the perspective of a student that you see and hear really well what the teacher is sending. But on the reverse side of that, I don't feel like the teacher needs to hear and see the same fidelity that the student needs, because the teacher would hopefully know all of the repertoire. And of course, that's how I run my studio. I want to make sure that I'm prepared for my lessons, just like I would ask a student to be prepared. And in this situation, it's actually really fruitful, and it's been working fine for many years. So now what I would like to do is flip over to my laptop and show you what this looks like from the other perspective. Hey guys, this is my laptop setup here that I just threw out here to show you what a good online view would look like, at least as far as what I need And I know the audio and video quality is not nearly as good, and that's because that's what comes with my MacBook. And a lot of you are going to be in this situation, but just so you know, I can work with this and I can see and hear what I need to hear to do a really good job with you. So this is really all you need to get started. Okay, so I admit that that doesn't really look great, but like I said, I don't need much from the student. I want to see the full range of the keyboard. I want to see their face so that the lesson feels personal. And I want the internet connection to support that experience. And when the student becomes advanced enough, I'll typically recommend a microphone purchase. And that's pretty much the end of it. It doesn't really get much more complicated than that. Some of my students have blessed me with amazing setups where they're broadcasting in stereo and it sounds awesome and I love it. And some of them have really good pianos, and that's such a pleasure to hear. And of course, I can give a really good lesson in that situation, like a really detailed, nuanced lesson, but it is not essential, and that's a massive barrier to entry for most students. So I want to make sure that you are aware from the student's perspective that you don't need very much to actually get started. One thing I would like to mention before I end this video is that a tablet works fine as well. I should have mentioned that earlier. Tablet works fine, iPads and things like that. If you use a tablet, you're going to need to get a tablet stand. And that's even more important than a laptop stand because laptops are actually pretty easy to position. In fact, I prefer a student to have a laptop because they are upgradable and they're really easy to position because the camera is basically on the same hinge that the screen is. So it makes it really easy to set up. And of course, if the student is using Zoom, they'll be able to hear in stereo if they're using a laptop, or also if they're using a desktop with like external cameras and things like that. But if you're using an iPad, you're limited to the hardware that the iPad has. And the iPad actually has pretty good camera and pretty good mic, especially the recent ones. But at the same time, you can't really upgrade that, so you're stuck with that. And then you'll need a laptop stand because the angle of the screen needs to be a little bit more than perfectly vertical. And that's probably going to be a little dangerous if you make your own thing to make that happen. You'll probably end up breaking your iPad. So don't do that. Just get a stand that can clamp onto the side of the iPad so that it can angle down like it needs to. And you'll position it pretty similarly to the laptop. And I would say like half my students are running iPad-based setups and it works just fine. But if you haven't purchased the device yet, you should get a laptop. I think that's going to be the best experience. At this point, with the technology that we have and with the phones with the cameras and with the mics that we have access to these days, even the stock ones that come in the device, it is perfectly reasonable to have a great online lesson with a wide variety of devices, with a wide variety of setups. Just make sure that your internet connection is rock solid. That's the most important thing. And make sure your device is modern enough and you will have a good experience. I see people complaining all the time, like teachers and students, that like they don't know what's possible with an online lesson, and online lessons don't compare to real lessons at all. And there's a lot of debate about that because there's conveniences and there's pros of the online lesson format that are not the same as the in-person format and vice versa, right? Each situation is preferred in certain circumstances. Like if you're a really young student or if you're a really, really advanced student, you probably need in-person instruction. But for the rest of us, we can probably get along just fine if we want in the online lesson situation. And in fact, to prove this, I think last year I took online lessons myself for like many months at the advanced level. And the teacher that I was working with didn't have a particularly sophisticated setup. It was just a webcam on a tripod, no mic or anything, and it was just the webcam mic, right? I had a great experience, even though it wasn't like all of the visual and audio fidelity that I would prefer. I still grew in that situation. I learned a lot of repertoire. I fine-tuned a lot of repertoire. And I live nowhere near this person. It was all online. Like, that's awesome. It totally works. It can work if you'll put in the effort and get the minimum essential setup and get the strong internet connection and position your device properly. So anyway, hope this is helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next video.